Hi everyone, it's Ebony, and today we are talking about how to admit students to a Zoom class. And so based on some of your feedback and guidance, we've heard concerns around students sharing Zoom links with other students and students who do not belong to your class entering your Zoom classroom. So some guidance that we are giving you today is simply to set your default settings in Zoom to enable your waiting room. This will hold the students in the waiting room until you admit the student. And we're recommending that you admit students one by one to the class after you verify that they indeed belong in that class. We're also going to show you how to digitally remove a student who doesn't belong in the class or send them to the waiting room, which is a better practice, and restrict their access to your class. So the first thing we will need to do is go to our zoom.us account, and from there, log in using your district email address, and we want you to enable the waiting room. And so then in your settings area, under the security tab, you would enable your waiting room. Now, what this will do is it will place them in the waiting room. It will require you as the host to admit them individually, and enabling the waiting room automatically disables the settings where a student could join before the host. All right. A new feature that popped up at the bottom then it will say everyone will go into the waiting room. You just want to make sure that that's checked off. All right, so you're going to zoom.us, you're logging in using your email address from West Orange, you're going to settings, your security tab, you're enabling your waiting room, and you are confirming that everyone will go into the waiting room. Now, there's a cool new feature here in Zoom as well, which says customize your waiting room, where you are able to leave a message for your students. For example, period 2 students, period 1 is just wrapping up. We will be with you in one moment, and I will admit each of you to the Zoom class one by one. And you can put your Bitmoji there, and we're even going to teach you how to run videos in your waiting room to entertain your students while they're waiting. And that'll be a more advanced feature. It'll be forthcoming. After you enable your waiting room, it should automatically disable the student's ability to join before the host. We want you to check that feature. So again, scroll down in your settings, go down to the schedule meetings section, and make sure that join before host is disabled. This will allow the participants to join the meeting after you, the teacher, arrives, not prior to. So how do you let a student in if they are in the waiting room? So there's 2 places you can admit a student from. It can be from your main screen, and that's your black gallery view where you see the students' pictures, or you can admit them from the participant window. So we're going to start with the main screen first. When you're on the main screen, a pop-up will come onto your screen, and in this example it says Shivam Malani has entered the waiting room for this meeting. So to admit Shivam to the class, you would just click admit. Now, in an instance when there are multiple students waiting, you can click see waiting room. So in the second example, it says 3 people have entered the waiting room for this meeting. You can click see waiting room, and then you can admit 1 student at a time. The second way was from the participant window. So you would click manage participants. It says that there are 3 participants waiting, and your participant window will pop up. And then you can see that Samuel, Stephen, Jaden Bitter, and Kylie Cunningham are waiting to be admitted to your Zoom class. So you can click admit on each of their names after you've confirmed that in fact they belong in your class. Now, there is the admit all feature, and some of you are using that feature, and what that does is that admits every student in the waiting room at once. You can use this after you verify that all of them belong in your class. However, if you've had some concerns about students trying to enter your class who shouldn't be, then I would admit 1 student at a time. Another cool feature that is here is that you can click on message. And by clicking on message, you can message all of the students in your waiting room, right? So again, you can type period 1 is wrapping up, period 2 will be admitted shortly. Give us, we'll be right with you, right? All right, so there's that message feature. Removing students from a Zoom class. Now here's a feature that's available. There's an instance where you should use it and an instance where you should consider not using it, and then we'll give you an alternative. So if students are in the waiting room, Samuel, Jaden, and Kylie, and you know who Samuel and Jaden are, but you don't know who Kylie is, then you would admit Samuel and Jaden, and then you would remove Kylie. You don't know who she is. This will not enable Kylie to enter your classroom, and it won't enable her to enter any of your other classes, okay? But if a student is already in your class and you'd like to remove the student from your class for whatever reason, you can place them in the waiting room. This brings them out into the waiting room. You can message that student, communicate with them that way. But what this does is, if Lisa, in this instance, you're removing her from this class, but you want her to be able to join future classes, especially if you're reusing your same Zoom link, then I would put her in the waiting room. I would message Lisa and then have a conversation if you need to at the end of that class, so that Lisa can rejoin your class at a different time. So here we're showing you how to remove a student if you need to. Just know that if you remove a student, they will not be able to join a future class if you have the feature enabled in your settings that says prohibit students from rejoining. And an alternative to that could be to put them in the waiting room. Another instructional strategy we'd like to provide for you with regard to your participant panel is keeping it open during your class. So some of you wrote in that sometimes you're in your class and you can't tell whether a student is in the waiting room, you missed the pop-up, or you didn't see it in the participant window because you were presenting at the time, you were sharing your screen, or you were in a breakout session. So here's a cool feature. Now, your participant window is usually attached to your gallery view, to your window. You can click on this down caret and you can pop out the participant window. That means that it will float and it will move around. So similar to my picture that's up at the top, I can move my picture by clicking on the gray control bar at the top, holding it down, and then moving my floating panel. You can do the same with the participant window when you pop it out, and your chat box. You can pop them both out. Now that's a really neat feature because then I can resize it, I can put it in the corner, and whether I'm sharing my screen or if I'm in a breakout room, the participant window will always be there, so then I can keep my eye on it and see if a student is waiting in the waiting room to enter the class. Also, for the chat feature, if you're sharing a screen, if you're speaking with the students and you're asking them to answer some questions and engage in dialogue with you, you can keep your chat feature in a corner, resize it so that it's in a good place for you to consistently check back and use that feature that way. Now, you're going to get some advice from Diana in another video around chat and how to use that, and some instructional strategies around that as well. So reference that video. All right, and then we have a last resort. Our last resort, more of a security measure, is lock your meeting. So if you ever have a need to lock your Zoom class down, you can go to the bottom of your participant window, you can click more, and then click lock meeting. This will prevent anyone else from entering your Zoom class. Now, we're not recommending this as an instructional practice, but more as a security feature. So all of your students are in your class, you feel maybe someone was trying to get into your class, you can lock your meeting, right? If somebody came into your waiting room, you didn't recognize who they were, and you remove them, but you can lock your meeting, and that way no one else can enter your Zoom class. Now, locking the class will prohibit students who maybe their call got dropped, they were booted from Zoom, now they're not going to be able to get in. So that's the disadvantage to locking the class. However, cool thing, you can lock, unlock, right? You can disable, enable that feature all throughout your class if you needed to. A good way to think about locking is if you're doing an assessment, right? You're giving an assessment, you're proctoring that assessment, you told students to be there, the assessment already started, you don't want students entering the meeting while you're administering the assessment, you might lock it and then unlock it after the assessment is done. Message students in the waiting room where right now we're taking a test and you can come at this time, etc. So think about this feature. Again, it should be a last resort, not an instructional practice, but more of a security feature. However, it is here for your use. And so that concludes admitting students to a Zoom class. If you have any questions, please email us and we will try to respond in our FAQ. Or if it's an item that a lot of you are asking the same question about, we will respond via email. Thank you. Have a good day.